Welcome back to another video on Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, and today I am going to do a deep dive on all of the defender units in this game. Now, as you guys can see, I have actually leveled up every single one of them to level 35 because I have been testing them in 2 different game modes to see exactly how they perform. I will obviously show you guys the actual test result and also my conclusion towards the end of the video. However, also just a bit of a curveball that I'm also going to tell you guys is that I also decided to compare Jotaro against them. And the reason for this is that Jotaro, if you do actually get 1 dupe on him, he's actually able to increase his survivability a lot. In fact, if you can get another 2 dupes, so basically 3 dupes in total, he can increase his survivability even further. However, I feel like that could potentially be expensive, so I'm not sure how many people are willing to do that. However, I feel 1 dupe is still somewhat achievable for all of the free-to-play players. So I decided to also do this and test Jotaro against all of the defender type units as well, just to see whether or not it's actually worth getting this 1 dupe on him, because he can actually perform as a bit of a pseudo tank as well. Before showing you guys the actual test result, let me quickly explain how I have tested the character. So all of the characters are level 35 because that's the maximum I can go. However, I have unequipped their equipment, all of their equipment, to make a fair comparison across everyone, regardless of how you build them. Now, the R character is going to be completely maxed out because it's just easier to get him. For SR character, vast majority of them only have 1 dupe, so therefore their first passive unlock. The only exception is going to be Gyakyo, who I do actually manage to get lucky and have 3 dupes on him, so therefore the second passive unlock as well. SSR character, obviously the hardest to get dupe, so therefore she is going to be completely undupe. Now, in terms of Jotaro, I do have both the first ability and also the first passive unlock. First ability unlock, so I can switch the ultimate to time stop, and then obviously the first passive unlock with 1 dupe, just so that I can actually get this sustainability on him for him to be a pseudo tank. Okay, now let me show you guys my testing results. So I've tested all of the character in 2 different game modes. One is going to be against a single target, so that's in World Boss. And another one is going to be in hard story mode. So this one is chapter H110. And this is obviously against multiple enemies. And in fact, this stage I think has never ending mob. Even if you kill them, they will just respawn. So that's kind of why it's quite nice, 2 different type of content to test their survivability. Now, for the single target against World Boss, basically Rubber Soul and Gyakyo are the only ones died. Everyone else survived. And as you guys can see, Rubber Soul managed to survive all the way till the last 23 seconds. Gyakyo performed slightly worse, survived until the last 31 seconds. And this is actually quite interesting because they are actually the ones with the most dupe. However, they actually didn't perform very well. So Rubber Soul was max dupe because it's only an R character. Gyakyo actually have the second dupe on second passive unlock, whereas every other SR only have 1 passive unlock. However, it didn't help them at all. Now, in terms of damage, it's not even saying that, for example, they didn't survive, but they managed to do more damage in return. Now, you do have to bear in mind because they only survive for a short amount of time in the battle, so obviously the damage tend to be lower. However, even if you actually scale it up, it's not actually saying it's any much more than any of the other defender type character either. So that's kind of why, in my opinion, this already tells you Rubber Soul and Gyakyo are just not worth focusing your resources on. Now, in terms of the other defenders, so Abakio and also Hermes, they survived by putting on shield and they managed to survive comfortably. However, Von Stroheim and also Satana, I think that's the way he is called in the show, so I'm not actually going to use the in-game name, but Satana and also Von Stroheim, they basically survived by lifesteal. And that basically means that it can actually get somewhat risky. So as you guys can see here, this one, 9 seconds remaining, he literally only have like 2% HP remaining. However, he then managed to use an ult and actually life drain some HP back. So that's kind of what he managed to survive, but it's actually really, really tight. And you guys can see this more obviously in the actual PvE testing I'm going to show you later, because lifesteal is just not going to be as good or as efficient in the harder stages, okay? However, on Abakio and Hermes, they managed to comfortably survive the entire time. So from rating or ranking perspective, I'll probably say Abakio and Hermes are obviously going to be the best ones, and then followed by Von Stroheim and also Satana, purely because they do lifesteal rather than straight survivability. And then the worst rank is going to be Rubber Soul and also Gyakyo. And then now here's the curveball, which is Jotaro. He couldn't survive the entire battle. However, if you actually take a look, he survived all the way till the last 26 seconds, which is actually very respectable, because that's how long Rubber Soul and Gyakyo, like 2 actual duped up low rarity tank, managed to survive for. So even though he didn't survive the entire time, this is actually very respectable. And the other thing you guys also have to bear in mind is that in World Boss, the enemy never dies, okay? So it's not like in other game modes where if you actually kill off the enemy quicker, because that's essentially what Johto is trying to do, right? If you just take like how much damage he done, it's so much higher than everyone else. So as a result, it's actually in other type of game mode where the enemy can actually die. If you actually kill them off, obviously you reduce the amount of damage you would then receive, and then therefore you're able to survive even longer. However, World Boss, it's a bit more biased against Jotaro because the enemy can never die, so that's kind of why Jotaro is not quite able to survive the entire battle as well. But this is still very, very respectable in my opinion. Now moving on to the PvE stage, so against mobs of enemy. Now here, because I literally only played one character against an entire never-ending mob, so everyone's gonna die, okay? And you'll see how long they survive for. Now, I would like to say that every single second in this testing is actually going to matter purely because you are talking about against a whole mob of enemy. So even if you're only able to survive, let's say 3 seconds longer, that's actually quite a lot more damage you're able to sustain. So if we actually take a look at the testing for this, clearly Gyakyo once again performed the worst, and you can also see Von Stroheim and also Satana, they didn't survive very long either. All of them have like 103, 104 seconds remaining. Now Gyakyo just seems to be bad at survivability. It feels like if you take a look at his kill, which I'll talk about in a bit, it's more like control focus, so it kind of makes sense. And Von Stroheim and also Satana, it also makes sense because they survive by lifesteal, but against the harder stages, especially mobs, you're not able to life drain that much HP back. So as a result, they're also going to be killed off quite quickly. Now, the next one is going to be Rubber Soul. He survived till the last 100 seconds. He's a max dupe character, you kind of expect that. However, he still performed worse than a Bakio, who managed to survive till the last 97 seconds. And a Bakio then performed slightly worse than Hermes, who survived till the last 94 seconds. Okay, so here you can already tell a bit of a ranking as well. Rubber Soul, even though he's max dupe, he's not quite as good as a Bakio, and a Bakio, even though he has one dupe and the first passive unlock, he's still not quite as good as Hermes, who's not duped up at all. However, the most surprising thing, and also the most interesting one here, is actually going to be Jotaro. And this is what I meant earlier. Against the world boss, it's really biased against him because you literally can't actually kill off the enemy. However, in this stage, when the enemy can actually be killed off, what you then realize is that Johto can actually surprisingly last a long time. Because essentially you're actually killing off the enemy, even though they will respawn later on. However, there's still going to be a few time gaps where the enemy was respawning, etc. And therefore, during that time period, you're receiving less damage. So as a result, Johto actually managed to survive even longer than Hermes. Now, obviously, you have to bear in mind for this to happen, Johto does need one dupe on him. And also, I do have time stop, which potentially also help with the control effect, etc. So potentially, if I'm talking about like a no dupe Jotaro versus no dupe Hermes, or like if everyone's equal, one dupe Jotaro versus one dupe Hermes, Hermes can probably still perform better. But still, Hermes is just pure supporting and defending, whereas Johto is also able to do the actual damage. Okay, now let's do a quick review on all of the character and their skills, because there's certain things which are not really able to show by testing. For example, Hermes does actually have a supporting ability to protect your teammate with her ult as well. And obviously, I also have certain passive not quite unlocked on all of the character, so I do want to kind of talk about their usability as a whole. So starting off, let's go through Rubber Soul. He's completely max dupe. However, he performed pretty much on the lower end in both of the content, and especially comparing against a Bakio, he only have one dupe. And also bear in mind, a Bakio we initially get as part of tutorial, and also we get a free dupe on day 3 as well. I feel like a Bakio is the baseline, and if Rubber Soul is not able to outperform a Bakio with max dupe, then there's literally no point of investing in him. Okay, so you guys can definitely rule him out. Gyakyo performed the worst in both type of testing. However, he does have the potential to have a bit of a chill and also freeze effect. And I feel like that can potentially have good synergy with certain characters, such as Pet Shop. If you actually take a look at this, Pet Shop also have certain attacks which are to do with chilled enemies, etc. So there could be certain synergy just from that perspective. But as of right now, I personally don't really see like a chilled type team out there, purely because there are not actually that many characters which use this type of mechanic. So I'm also going to say Gyakyo is not really worth investing. Maybe in the future, if there are more characters which are to do with chilled effect or freeze effect, Gyakyo's value can go up slightly, but as of right now, I also think he's just not worth it. Okay, and then the next two is going to be Von Stroheim and also Satana. Both of them are further able to improve their passive able to improve their survivability by the 2 remaining passive, which I haven't unlocked. Okay, so they can potentially survive a bit more. However, with that being said, like I said, a back heal is kind of the baseline purely because we're guaranteed 1 dupe already by day 3, and a back heal can also further improve his own survivability. So I feel like the remaining passive skill that can be unlocked on back heal, Von Stroheim and also Satana are very similar, and so far we can already see that Von Stroheim and Satana are just not able to survive as much as a back heal, and also the way they survive is for lifesteal, and I just feel like lifesteal is one of those things that in the early stages, because the enemy are weaker, you're able to do more damage. That actually is more beneficial. However, as we get to the harder content end game, the amount you will be able to do is going to be less. The amount of damage you will do is less. Lifesteal is obviously going to be even less as a result. So I do feel like as we move towards endgame content, those two are definitely going to fall off and be worse than a back heel as well. Okay, so once again, I will say those two are no worth investing. And then moving on to your back heel, who, like I said, because everyone can guarantee at least 1 dupe by day 3, he's the baseline. If you guys need the defense unit, you guys should definitely focus on him. Now, if you are actually lucky enough to actually get Hermes, however, I would say that Hermes is going to be better than a back heel, even if you can actually get dupes on back heel. And the main differentiator is that from survivability point of view, from testing, you guys can see they both survive similar amount of time. However, one thing that Hermes is able to have, even without any dupe, is this supporting ability of, first of all, crowd control and also protecting your ally with the lowest HP. And both of them, I feel like, is very, very useful. Whereas if you actually take a look at a back heels move, there isn't really that much supporting ability available. Sure, this one is that you are able to redirect their target, so basically a bit of a taunt, but it's only redirecting the enemy who are already attacking a back heel already. So once again, I don't really feel like he is actually able to provide much support to your teammates, which Hermes is actually able to do. So if you are actually lucky enough to get 1 copy of Hermes, I would actually recommend Hermes over a back heel, even if you have dupes on a back heel. Okay, now to finish off, here's the curveball, which is Jotaro Kujo. Now, is he able to survive? Absolutely. If you actually have him at 1 dupe, he's absolutely able to survive. Like I showed earlier, in PvE stages, he's actually able to survive even longer than the other tank, purely because he can do damage, and more damage means you're able to kill off the enemy quicker, and therefore less enemy to actually then deal damage to you. Now, obviously, in certain format where the enemy can never die, such as World Boss, Jojo is not able to then survive as long because literally you can't really kill off the enemy in order to reduce the amount of damage you are taking. But bear in mind, he's supposed to be a pseudo tank. His main job is actually out there doing damage to the enemy. I personally feel like from that perspective, he's certainly able to hold his own front in terms of team building. So if you really want to avoid getting a tank at all and just use Jojo Kujo as your main tank, that's absolutely fine. But in order to do that, you just need to get at least 1 dupe on him. And in fact, you can probably even consider getting 2 extra dupes, so 3 dupes in total, to increase his survivability even further. But even at 1 dupe, it's already been tested that he can perform just as well as all of the other existing tanks. Okay. So yeah, so that's going to be my review of all of the defender units in the game, and also how viable is Jotaro as a pseudo tank and whether or not it's worth getting a dupe on him. Let me know what you guys think, and also, do you even plan play a defender unit in your team, and if so, which one are you going with right now?